Good morning, this is Rebecca Arant with Georgia Cyber Academy, and I am going to go over some learning coach training today over related services. And we're going to talk for just a few moments here at the beginning on exactly what is a related service. You may be watching this video and you think, I've never even heard of that, so we're going to talk about that today. It says, what is a related service? Related services are supportive services that are required for students in assisting them in their academics, such as speech language therapy, occupational therapy, and physical therapy. GCA provides these services for students based on a student's IEP. The IEP team considers the goals and objectives on a student's IEP and then determines if special support is needed. The setting of the task and school environment is also taken into account. And services run during the school year calendar, not during holidays. I'm going to stop for just a moment and talk about this slide. So related services are basically extra supportive services that a student needs, such as speech therapy or occupational therapy, to help them make progress on their goals and objectives. And you may wonder, well, how do I know if my student needs these? Well, during an IEP meeting, the team will discuss the goals and objectives on the IEP, and then when they start to discuss services, they will determine if services are needed to help the students make progress in those areas. And then at the bottom, that last note, as I read earlier, those services only run during the school year calendar, so those are not offered on holidays like Columbus Day or during Thanksgiving break. All right, how do related services work in the virtual environment? So your student is a part of this virtual world and you're wondering, well, I'm not really sure how this is going to happen. Okay, well let's take a moment and talk about that. GCA contracts with numerous providers throughout the state to carry out related services for students. We have hundreds of providers, and these providers, these services may be provided in a variety of locations. These services can be provided through virtual therapy. We have students that receive their therapy online. We also have clinic-based therapy, community-based therapy, and then we also have home therapy as well. And it's not necessarily something where you can make a request and say, well, I really want someone to come to my home. It's really based on the student's need, and it's also based on location and region where your student's located and availability. Sometimes our providers are full, so we have to look at someone else or a different provider. And sometimes, especially in more rural areas, it may be harder to find someone in your area that's close by, so there may be someone that's able to come out to the home, or we may decide to offer the virtual therapy that may be the best option. All right, let's look at the next slide. My child is to receive related services. Now what? Well, once the IEP determines a student is to receive related services, the student's case manager or teacher will put a request into the related services department for the student to receive the appropriate services as noted on the student's IEP. So after an IEP meeting, there's some follow-up by the teacher or the case manager. They contact the related services department, let them know and put a flag out that this student is to receive these services. And then the related services department will then pair the student up with the provider and notify that provider to go ahead and contact the student's parent or guardian to schedule the services. And that provider will be the first contact that the parent has with the clinic. The parents, we don't give out phone numbers directly to parents. We ask the providers to contact parents first. And then after an IEP meeting, a parent or guardian should receive contact from a provider, within a week to set up those services. We like to get those going very quickly. All right, let's talk about scheduling. So you're saying, okay, someone's going to call me and contact me to set these services up. Well, I want to know when they're going to come. Well, related services are typically scheduled between school hours, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. And it is encouraged that services are not scheduled during a student's online class time. However, if this is the only availability for services, please begin the service as offered. And let's stop for just a moment and talk about that. So services are offered Monday through Friday during those school hours, 8 to 5. And we know that online classes are required for students. So we have informed providers to please do their best to work around that. However, sometimes they may not have an opening at any other time. So then your student would need to go ahead and take part in those services. The next bullet says related service providers may take into account personal requests from families regarding scheduling of services. However, they are not required to accommodate personal schedules. And that's something very important to talk about. Of course, we always want to do our best to work with families, but we have numerous families here at GCA, and the providers see numerous families at GCA. They also see clients outside of GCA as well. So they have a full caseload or full clientele list as well. They do their best to meet the demands and meet those needs of families, but sometimes they're just not able to accommodate everyone's requests. So please keep that in mind. Attendance to a related service. This is very important. Those services are mandatory. If it's on a student's IEP, it has to take place. So it's not something that's optional. 24-hour notice should be given if your student is going to be absent. That's very important. If your student misses a scheduled service appointment, then the provider is not required to make up this time. So we know that sometimes kids get sick, things happen, and you just can't make it that day. Maybe you are not able to give that 24-hour notice, but please go ahead and just let the clinic know or the provider know as soon as possible if your student is going to be out. It's also a good idea to let the case manager know as well, or the child's teacher. So if your student misses, then the provider is not required to make that session up. They will a lot of times be able to offer a session as a makeup, but it's not required, so just keep that in mind. As I said earlier, their schedules are very full, and they have a lot of clients to fit in as well, so they do their best. If a provider cancels though, and they're out, maybe they have a conference to attend, or they're sick, then they have to make up that session within a reasonable time. They have to offer a makeup session. Let me rephrase that. They have to offer a makeup session within a reasonable time. And it's also important to note that the provider will attempt to work with families for those makeup sessions. They are required to offer at least 3 optional times. But if none of those 3 offers work for the family, then the family will have to forfeit that session for the student. So please keep that in mind. And then the bottom note here, just make sure, as I said earlier, that you notify the student's case manager or teacher if your student is out or going to be out for some reason. Especially if it's an issue where your student's going to be out for a week or so. Maybe they're having surgery, or something of that nature is going on. All right, let's look at logging attendance. You may say, well, my child's attending these services. Where am I supposed to log that they're going? Well, that needs to be recorded in attendance too. Just as your student would take part in speech therapy during the school day, that's a part of their academic day, so is their therapy or their related service. So make sure you log that into your student's OLS or your online school account daily. That should be logged under the Related Services tab. And it's also important to note, do not log private therapy or driving time into the OLS. So it may take 10 minutes for you to get to the therapy session, but they're only in therapy for 30 minutes. You do not need to log 40, you only need to log that 30 minutes. And if your student receives additional therapies outside of GCA, those do not need to be logged under school time. Okay, here's some important notes that we need to stop and talk about for just a few moments. Parent learning coach training should be an integral part of each therapy session. If skills are not generalized to all school activities, then the student gains are not as strong. And just as in a brick and mortar setting, a therapist trains teachers, paraprofessionals, etc. to help students in accessing and implementing strategies during lessons. Therefore, the learning coach should take part in the sessions as well. That's very encouraged. The learning coach is encouraged to go back and take part in those sessions regardless of the setting. We want you to be able to implement those strategies when you're working with a student on a variety of academic tasks during the day as well. And it's okay for therapists to co-treat and do therapy at the same time. Sometimes our students need the speech therapy and the occupational therapist to work together, and that's called co-treating, and that can definitely happen, and that's perfectly fine. It's okay for a therapist to attend class with a student as well to help integrate and generalize information, and it is in fact encouraged. So we encourage our therapists to log on with our students. If it's during their therapy time, it would be a part of that therapy time to help them be successful during that class setting, that online class setting. Okay, let's talk about some frequently asked questions. These are some questions that come up pretty frequently, and we just need to touch base on those. If my child's service is scheduled on a school holiday, like a one-day holiday, for instance Columbus Day, does my child receive services on that day? And I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation that services run during the school calendar. So the answer to that question would be no if your student's IEP notes that they receive it on that particular day of the week. So for instance, if Columbus Day is on a Monday, and your child's IEP notes that they receive speech therapy 60 minutes one time per week on Monday, okay, then no, your student cannot make that up because that's a school holiday, that Monday is. But yes, your student can make it up if the IEP reads a little bit differently. So it's all in how the IEP is written and how it reads. If your student's IEP reads that they receive speech therapy 60 minutes per week and it doesn't specify a certain day and that holiday was on a Monday, then your student can make that session up. If the school holiday is a week-long holiday, for instance, Thanksgiving break, Christmas, winter break, spring break, then your student will not receive services during that week. So even if your student's IEP says speech therapy 60 minutes per week and the school holiday is during winter break, your student will not make that up. Okay, so let's go on to the next frequently asked question. I'm having to drive 30 minutes for my child's therapy. Isn't that too far? And you know, that does seem like a good bit of time to drive, but the answer is no. Unfortunately, GCA tries to accommodate families in regards to travel time. That just means that we do our best to pair students up with a provider that's close by if your student is actually going to a clinic setting. However, you may be asked to drive 30 minutes or further for therapy if there's not a closer contracted provider in your area. So sometimes that is the case. And then of course we also sometimes are able to offer the virtual setting or an in-home provider. It just really depends on availability, region, and location. Those are the key factors there. All right, questions. That pretty much covers everything that I had to mention today that I wanted to mention about related services. But if you have any additional questions, we want you to get those questions answered. So please go ahead and contact your child's case manager or your child's teacher directly. And if they do not know the answer, they will reach out to someone who does, and we will follow up with you. But I hope that this training was beneficial to you, and I hope that you have more information than you started with in reference to related services and how that works in the virtual school environment. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.